executives, business owners, and you transform your career, business, life, and relationships. This is the Growth to Freedom Show. Now, here is your host, Dan Kuschell.
That's right. That's what we're talking about. Welcome to growthtofreedom.com, the show that helps you transform your life, business, and relationships. I'm Dan Kuschell, and thanks for making us part of your day. We've got a great show today that's going to bring you more confidence, more clarity, more capabilities. We're going to talk about some things that probably hit you where it matters most, right? I mean, as you think about it right now, where in your life are things going incredibly well, right? I mean, I'm sure there are some areas, right? If you really stop and think about it, whether it's in your life, your career, maybe your business, maybe your relationships, mentally, physically, socially. I mean, there are areas that you're excelling at. And on the other end, there might be some areas that aren't going so well, right? And here's something to know, right? We all have some area of dysfunction that we're dealing with. And the key isn't whether we are having that, it's how we deal with it. So today's show, we're going to talk about accelerating your success, taking it to the next level, staying more in the sweet spot of those great things that you're doing, and minimizing the time frames of things like doubt, adversity, failure, rejection, and more. I mean, would that be a great show for you? Would that be of value? You know what? Because I think this is where the rubber meets the road. Our show, by the way, is presented by doneforyousolutions.com. We'd love to connect with you. You can join us on Twitter at Dan_Kuschell. That's Dan_Kuschell. And what's your Twitter handle, by the way?
It's Cristy Lopez, PhD.
Cristy Lopez, PhD.
So
you can join us. Hit us up with some questions. We'd love to have some future questions to be able to pull into the show as well,
That'd be great.
as we air nationwide. And by the way, stay tuned. Near the end of the show, we've got a special resource package that we're making available to you today as our gift to you, right? And it's going to be an incredible opportunity for you to get mastery in areas like influence, persuasion, communication, building a business, being able to really hone in on the things that matter most with mastery, growth, and freedom as well. So let's dive into it. Today's guest is a regular expert on the show, Dr. Cristy Lopez. She's a great friend of the show. She's been on shows like Downsized, Dr. Phil. She's a psychologist. She helps people in transition. She helps people in transition with their life, their career, their business, and relationships, and she does coaching. And I've gotten a chance to know her over the last 5 years. We've become great friends, and I consider her a coach too, and that's actually how we met. I sought out some guidance and some advising, and we worked together for, like 3 years?
Yeah.
3 years, did a lot of hard work. Boy,
Yes,
we built up
yes.
those muscles. We
Yes.
went into the Cristy Lopez conditioning program. Boy, that was
Yes.
intense.
Yeah. And
I
I,
went-
like it when people work out. You did the work.
Yes, and still doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Still
it's a
working on it.
continuous
That's what the
thing.
show is really,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Growth to freedom, peace of mind,
Yes.
mastery, all of it. And that's what we want to bring you. And so today's a great day because we're going to talk about some things that I think really do matter, right?
Yeah.
Because we can, have rose-colored glasses on and pretend everything's great all the time and it's all about the positive things going on. But you know what? We all deal with the adversity every day, right? We deal with doubt. We deal with self-doubt. Though, you ever get those little voices in your, not those kind of voices, but
Yeah, that's a different.
yeah, that's a different kind
show.
of voice. That's a
different-
different
yeah.
show altogether.
Yes.
Actually, that's the one with the white padding, not this black padding on, right? But anyway, that probably wasn't
Okay, yes.
appropriate. But nonetheless, let's dive into it because I think today's going to really matter most. Where your life, I want you to imagine as you're listening right now, as you're watching right now, imagine yourself in a peak state, like you at your very best, whatever that might be. Maybe it's in a career, maybe it's at home, maybe it's with your kids, where you just feel like at your very, very best with energy and excitement and enthusiasm, doing what it is that you're called to do, right? And maybe right now you might not even be able to access what that might be. So maybe it was 6 months ago, or maybe it was a year ago. I know for me, thinking about my past, there were times when I was playing sports at the highest level, competitive, Olympic type stuff, and having just a blast, semi-pro and all that kind of craziness. And I can think back to that and channel that energy and that thought process very quickly, or hitting a home run. And even today, it's like 30 years later or whatever it's been, to be able to pull up to put me into a peak state, right? When I have those little voices or that self-doubt. So for you, what is that, right? You at your peak state, you at your very best. And I encourage you, if you're driving right now, don't do this. But if you have the ability to write down a couple of the areas where you can recall right now, right in this moment, what are those areas that you've had a peak state, right? Now, on the other side of it, we all deal with the voices of doubt. And I'm thoroughly convinced, and I don't know if this is accurate, but we were talking about this in prep for the show. I believe that at the end of the day, of course, there's needs, there's values. We've talked about those at growthtofreedom.com/26. You can also go to growthtofreedom.com/21 and 22, where we talk about those. And we just celebrated our 6-month anniversary of the show, right? Over 112,000 views now downloaded. And we hit new and noteworthy, all that good stuff. So thank you. Definitely. It's been awesome. But nonetheless, we're going to deal with adversity. And it's, Mike Tyson has a quote. He says, everybody's got a plan until they get hit, right? And we're going to get hit. Now, what do we do with it?
Yes.
And when that doubt comes up, and I think, the two areas, if I had to sum it all up, I think we're all searching for feeling like we're good enough, right? And that we're loved. Really, and everything else is layers of cake, I think, on top of that personally. But what are your thoughts on that? So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, those do tend to be some fundamental core needs and desires and human nature. So people are very social oriented themselves. They're very egocentric. So that's the part within themselves. Are they good enough? But are they good enough for who? For them? For other people? Both? Because then there's the social aspect. People are very social too. Again, kind of like evolutionary wise, it was to the benefit to be social and to have that support. So even the good enough one is internal as well as external. Am I loved? And that also could be internal, external. Am I loved? Do I love myself? Yep. Or do other people love me? Do other people like me? I come across this a lot where people are really beating themselves up and have all this talk about whether or not somebody really likes them, and not just a particular person, but people in general. Do people like them? And it'll motivate them to do some things that really aren't in their own best interest, because that is so primary for them.
Yes, and speaking of that, speak to the idea that it's my observation that as human beings, we're all very self-conscious at our core. So speak to the idea of being self-conscious and the difference between being, responsive in that self-consciousness, reactive or overreactive in the self-consciousness.
Yeah, so that's the thing of being very egocentric. And teenagers, as everyone probably knows who has teenagers, they really are that way. Okay, but people in general are. So what you're, very self-conscious, very aware of what's going on with them and how other people are seeing them. That's kind of what the main thing is, because actually a lot of people don't have too much awareness of themselves in a healthy way, but they have this kind of like, ooh, how am I being perceived? And then a lot of people, then they react out of that or overreact to that. So there is a lot that we talk about being very aware of yourself, but being aware of yourself in a healthy, comprehensive way, not necessarily with the intention of action right away, because that's the whole idea, is for you to first be able to be aware and accurately, this is the other thing, accurately be aware of what's going on with you in all of these different ways. What's going on with you physiologically? What's going on with you emotionally? What are you thinking? What's your energy like? Even intuition. So there's various different ways of being aware of yourself and being comfortable with that and building up your accuracy with that. Once you do that, then you can have the space between awareness and then choosing. So this is the big thing, because you actually could choose how you then react, and you can also choose to not become overwhelmed by what's coming up.
Yeah, that's so important. And what's amazing is I've taken a lot of what we've done together and a lot of the experts I've learned from over the years, and I really work hard to share these principles with Kira and Kyler, right, my kids. And here about a week or so ago, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, we sat down and we did an exercise together as how we see ourselves, right? Because I think at the end of the day, how we ultimately see ourselves ultimately determines our destiny, where we really go. And then I also think what you said is so critically important. And then the second layer of that is how others see us too, right? And where we stand there. And when those two work together, there's a great synergy. But if one is up here and the other one is down here, there's going to be contradiction, there's going to be conflict, there's going to be disconnect, right? Overall. But what I had Kira and Kyler do is I said, hey, write down what you see as your greatest talent, skills, and abilities. And, and they were writing things like playful and good athlete and, smart and good at math. And, so they're starting to build self-esteem, right? Or how they see themselves with these different, and I think they listed like 15 things each, which was kind of surprising the very first time.
Oh, yeah,
right?
That's great.
Which, I know when we sat down and I went through, I had a hard time coming up with a handful of identity things. So speak to that about, where does that doubt creep in? Why is it we don't have the ability to articulate what it is that we have as our talent, our ability, our skill set?
Yeah, I'm very impressed to hear that they're able to do that, and that is great.
And maybe it was only 10, but it seemed like, and maybe as a proud dad, I might be doubling it, right?
But that's still impressive. And to teach them while they're young is super important, because usually what happens is people are getting the other messages as they're growing up, and it's just adding. And I think I may have said this before, I kind of say this thing about people look for evidence to support their beliefs. So if they're picking up stuff when they're young that they are not good enough, or people don't like them, or some kind of like negative message, then they tend to look for evidence to support that belief and discount the evidence that is contrary to that. So now they're like building this up over time. So by the time they're adults, that is the the preponderance of the self-talk that they have, is all this kind of negative self-talk. So I will ask people to just kind of on the top of your head list some positive qualities about yourself. This is another one where people are stumped. People are pretty much almost stumped by all the questions I give them. And this is another one. They maybe say one or two, but a lot of them are really stumped. So usually what I have to go to then is, okay, well, who's somebody that you have a great relationship with right now? Your spouse, a sibling, a coworker, a friend, who? Okay, now think of that person. What would that person say? So then this is the other person's perspective, and that somehow people are able to start kind of coming up with stuff, but they have a hard time generating it on their own. And then when I see families and I ask them for positive characteristics about each other, this is where it's really sad too, because they're stumped there too.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, and this is a deep, deep topic, a deep, deep subject that we could go into. But let me ask you, as you're watching or you're listening, right, what if we could show you a way to get more into the peak states that you want to be accelerating in, and we could help you eliminate the doubt, or at least reduce it to a significant exponential level as far as it relates to criticism, failure, rejection, that and a whole lot more. Boost your self-esteem, boost your confidence, boost your clarity, and ultimately give what you want most. And that's freedom, peace of mind, mastery. And that's what this show is all about. So we'll be right back with Dr. Cristy Lopez on growthtofreedom.com. Welcome back to growthtofreedom.com, the show that helps you transform your life, business, and relationships. Let's summarize the first segment of the show. First of all, we've got Dr. Cristy Lopez. She's a regular guest on the show, and she's been on Dr. Phil, Downsized, many other media outlets. She's a psychologist. She helps people in transition in their career, life, business, and relationships. She does coaching, counseling, and more. And we've been talking about you at your very best, right? You getting to a place of being at a peak state and then hitting the accelerator, or what things help you accelerate that momentum, and also some of the decelerators that get in the way. Like, have you ever found yourself dealing with doubt or adversity or criticism or failure? And in the first segment, we talked about the idea of being self-conscious, right? And how we see ourselves, and also how other people see us, or at least our perspective of those things has a major, major impact. And guess what? You can choose to shift that awareness, right? No matter where you're at today, it doesn't matter where you've been, it matters where you want to go. So if you want to make a shift, you can start now by just shifting your perspective. A great question to ask is, what does this mean, right? And then an extra question is, what else could this mean? So how you see yourself, what does that mean? Well, what else could it mean? And what else could it mean? And you could keep digging to ultimately get to a choice of something that's far more empowering than maybe where you're at right now. We have evidence that supports our beliefs, right? A great exercise is to list the positive qualities. We left off talking about Kira and Kyler's example, and they're 9 and 7, and here they are listing whatever it was, 10, 11, 12, 15 qualities of the things that they're proud of the skills and capabilities that you have. And going back to the two things I talked about, being good enough and being loved is part of the layers. And I think most of what and how we show up is a relation to and react, overreact, or respond to things has to do not even with the present moment. It has to do with the past, right? And most of the time, it's things that we've dealt with, in childhood. You know, whether it could be an abuse, it could be good things. But for a lot of people, we hold on. We have a lot of attachment for whatever reason to some of the bad things that may have happened, even if it was one time, right?
Yep.
But it becomes a major impact. So, in many ways, we talk about this in terms of dealing with loss. And there was a great book called Death and Dying, right? And the whole idea that they talked about in the book from Kubler-Ross is this DABDAR approach and dealing with loss. And loss can show up, in adversity. It can be a divorce. It can be loss of a job, a loss of a career. It could be loss of a loved one, loss in a so many. It could even be, I think, I've noticed it in dealing with rejection, in dealing with failure, all
loss
of it.
Esteem, loss of confidence, loss of image, all of those kinds of things.
So speak to it. You're the expert at this, far more than what I have as far as just experience. You have from a science point of view as well as working with thousands of clients. Talk about loss, the impact of it, and how it plays into our role as our self-conscious, self-awareness, and confidence in general.
Well, yeah, so...
and do that in 5 minutes. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes, I'm all in 5 minutes.
Go!
People pretty much are dealing with loss almost continuously, and it does have a big range. And one of the important things to know and remember is that everybody is different and unique when it comes to loss, okay? Because somebody could lose who knows who, or even lost some kind of like possession, like a house or something like that. And other people would think, well, why are you, so messed up over that? Okay. Or the opposite can happen where you lose somebody and then, somebody makes a remark of like, well, why aren't you breaking down? Okay. So for some reason, people like to make comments about how other people handle loss.
Oh, yeah.
So the main thing to remember is don't do that. Everybody is unique in how they handle loss, and just what you see may not necessarily be indicative of what's going on inside, because usually it's not. And whatever that is, it's up to that person on what they want to share or what they want to do with that. So,
and we all have a grieving process,
yes,
essentially, in dealing with this loss, right? And like one of the most awkward things, over the last year, I've had a couple friends who lost, loved ones, like family members or parents. And I can get a loss to even what do I even say? It's and I'm sure as you're watching, as you're listening, you can relate to this. It's just an awkward, what do you say to somebody?
Right.
And the only thing that really pops up for me these days is, hey, I just was thinking of you. I'm here if you need anything at all, let me know.
Yeah, which is a very
thoughts
good,
and prayers out to you, kind of thing.
And that's very much what is recommended. Is something kind of very short and sweet. Because people will say things, and it actually can end up doing more harm than good. So kind of the shorter the better, and letting the person know you're there. You can't even specifically let them know how you're there. Like, hey, I'm available to watch your kids tomorrow so that you could, whatever the person needs to do. Or, hey, I'm gonna bring over dinner for you or something. So you can ask the person what they need. You can let them know it's for whatever they want, or you can even just kind of volunteer something up. Very specific, but that's the thing is, sorry for their loss, and you can contribute this thing or be there for them. And that's really pretty much it, because if you start going other directions, you can be in some pretty tricky territory.
And I've heard you talk about the idea that some people train themselves to be good victims.
Yes.
Can someone train themselves that their life, because of circumstances and momentum and so on, that they train themselves to always be in this pattern of grieving?
Oh, yeah.
Essentially.
You can almost train yourself to anything, because it's conditioning is what it is. And that's why I ask a lot of these questions that I ask, and I really get to these deeper things, because a lot of this stuff is even subconscious. So people can say, or I'm presenting here because, hey, Dr. Lopez, I would like to, yes, I would like to be happy. Well, yeah, of course. What does happiness mean? Okay, so we have to get into all that. But they'll say things like that, or they're trying to be different or do something different, yet they keep self-sabotaging, or they keep putting themselves or allowing themselves to be in the same patterns that keep that going, because it's what's familiar. and that's what they're used to. And in a weird way, that's what they're good at. And in another weird way, that's what your brain is good at, because your brain is always looking for efficiency and shortcuts, and it knows that kind of stuff. So there are people who can be, how you kind of hear like, oh, wow, that person's addicted to whatever, addicted to drama, or addicted to always being, the victim or a martyr, or addicted to being sad. Or it sometimes it actually comes out where it is almost like an addiction, where the person is having a hard time breaking out of those kinds of patterns.
And breaking out of those kind of patterns, I mean, in the book that Kubler-Ross talks about, it's Dabdar. And when we come back after the break, we can go more into detail on the grieving process that we all go through. And the question is whether we go through it in short order or the extended of time, and it shows up a few different ways. But denial, anger, bargaining, anxiety,
or depression, and
then acceptance, right? And how we respond to that. And we want to show you, we want to give you the tools to install a methodology to be able to go out and have things to work with that you can deal with this in a much simpler, more effective way. So when we come back, we're going to have the ability to talk more about giving you clarity, growth, and freedom around Dabdar, the process of grieving. We're going to talk more about how you can accelerate you at your very best, being at your peak state. We're going to also talk about how to essentially cut down on the self-doubt, cut down on the over-analysis, if you will. The analysis, by the way, doesn't it create paralysis? Are you tired of living in that place? Because analysis does create paralysis. And by the way, think about the way analysis is even spelled, and that might give you a perspective of why you need to shift out of that place, because doing something, taking action, and also doing it in a way that serves the things that you deserve most, like mastery, like growth, like freedom, peace of mind. We're going to show you how to get that and a whole lot more when we come back on growthtofreedom.com with Dr. Cristy Lopez. Welcome back to growthtofreedom.com. Boy, you would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in this segment of this show, as we've been having just an incredible banter back and forth about some ideas about accelerating your success, your peak potential, being able to stay away from the things that essentially hold us back, like doubt, like adversity, like dealing with failure, dealing with loss. And so if you're just joining us, to give you a recap, very short recap, because I want to dive right into it with this idea of loss and dealing with grieving, because we're all going to face it, right? And again, when I say grieving, I don't just mean someone passed away. I'm talking about, it could be a disappointment, frankly. It could be, a rejection that you got. Maybe you're a salesperson and you went out and you tried to make a sales presentation and you got said, turned down, and you had all these expectations that it was going to be. Yes, there's a grieving process that you go through, or you lost a client and so on. So, in fact, let's just dive into it. Talk about Dabdar, talk about grieving, that, how does this apply in normal everyday life outside of, say, a death, but in business, dealing with loss, dealing with failure, rejection, etc.
Well, a lot of this work was done, a few decades ago, and most of it was around the actual loss of somebody, but it can hold true for any kinds of losses. So you are saying this acronym that. So Kubler-Ross came up with this almost kind of like a little bit of stages. Now, again, like most things, it actually isn't necessarily like a step-by-step thing where you have to go one to the other and that's like solely. It can be mixed, it can come and go, that kind of thing. But generally, human nature is to first deny. And that's really like a defense mechanism, because when you're hit with something that's a shock, usually you want to try and like buffer that shock. So that's usually what the denial is about. So usually the first thing that kind of pops up for people is denial, because it's a real self-protective type thing. So that's the D, is denial. Then usually what happens is after they kind of like can, stand there for a second because, okay, now I can't keep denying this thing. Then the next kind of defense mechanism kicks in, which is, well, I don't necessarily want to turn it in on myself. So it's like you become very angry usually. And then it's anger towards whatever. So like, if you lost that client, then, you probably become angry towards that client. Or you get a diagnosis, you could become angry at the doctor or something, or anybody or something external. So people tend to then move into that stage next where they're very angry. And it could even be angry at their higher power. Because then a lot of people end up feeling guilty later on, because that tends to happen. So denial is generally kind of the first reaction people have, and then anger is the next reaction they have. And then what happens after that kind of gets out is people end up starting now doing like a little bit more cognitive type, bargaining type thing.
Okay. So not so emotional.
Yeah,
essentially.
So the first parts are really physiological and very emotional, and then now when you get into the bargaining stage, now that's a little bit more cognitive, because now you're kind of talking to yourself and or God or your higher power or even other people, and that's when you start doing these things. Like, I'm sure you all have these experiences or have seen it on TV, or people say, God, if you this, then I will, I'll be perfect from here on out. Or usually people will make these very unrealistic, extreme type statements, but it's this kind of bargaining thing they're doing, because what they're trying to do is gain back some sort of control. Because when you're in these kinds of situations, you usually feel helpless and out of control. And that doesn't sit well. So this bargaining thing kind of brings on the cognitive part of your brain, and this kind of a defense again to try and start controlling the situation by bargaining. So that'd be the next one. Then what happens after that is then time goes by and people realize, this is not really going to be the case. I cannot bargain away this loss. Then they start coming into being able to fully feel the loss. And then that's when you do move into more depression, and it can be anxiety too. So, but that's when they're able to start really feeling their feelings, because previously they were trying to deny their feelings, or they were channeling it into just one feeling. Now they're kind of able to kind of start feeling it for themselves, and more on the depression side of things. So that would be your depression stage. And then the idea is that this is a healing process, and so what would be helpful for your healing is to go through into the last phase, which is acceptance. And that does not mean you're then done, okay? Because this is the other thing. Grieving is a process that isn't necessarily something you finish, and like a loss is not something you necessarily get over. But if you can get to that state of acceptance, then you're able to cognitively and emotionally and everything else that's online deal with what's happening or what's happened, and then what does this mean for your life. So I always tell people, it's not that you're trying to get over this. It's that you're trying to process it in the most healthy, beneficial way you can for yourself, because you need to integrate it into your being and who you are so you could best move forward with it.
And we want to help you move forward with it, right? And now that you've got a process, the healing process that we all go through dealing with criticism, rejection, failure, and loss, now we want to show you how to transform that into you being at your peak state. So we'll cover that and a whole lot more with Dr. Cristy Lopez on growthtofreedom.com right after this. Welcome back to growthtofreedom.com. Boy, howdy, we had another coaching session here with Dr. Cristy Lopez at the break. And if you would have been a fly on the wall, you would be buzzing right now. And I'm buzzing. And, well, yeah, I'm buzzing. Okay. But if you're just joining, let's summarize the first couple segments of the show. I forget even what segment we're in. I think it's we're coming into the fourth. Yeah. And we've been talking about dealing with loss. We've been talking about essentially, as it relates to you as you're watching, in business, at home, in your relationships, you're gonna deal with rejection, failure, criticism, and this is a natural process of healing. And it's not like, as Dr. Lopez said, it's not like you go from one step to the other, and it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, anxiety, and acceptance. And the reality is, it's not over. Right. It's part of a process, yes. And that process is not just a start and stop process, but it's an ongoing process, right? And so that's where we left off, and now we want to talk about how you can transform, dealing with that type of rejection to be at your best, to be at your peak with confidence, clarity, capabilities, direction, focus, mastery, growth, peace of mind, and more, and the triggers and even the little gains, if you will, to be able to do that. So I'm going to start by asking a couple questions. Okay. So in this process of healing, the DABDAR process from the book On Death and Dying, how does this apply to someone dealing every day? People at home, people at work, kids, family members, criticism. How does this apply to criticism, and what can someone do to, maybe they get knocked off track and they go into these different phases, and for a day or two they're uptight and dealing with it. How can they shorten the time frame and make it a fun process to go through? Talk about that.
Okay. So like most of my things, it depends on what the criticism is about, okay, and who's doing it. So there's a lot of components to this.
Yep.
Okay, and what are you identifying?
You mean a one-size suit doesn't fit all?
I know, sorry.
Oh, gosh.
And it requires you to do all this work, like all this kind of prep work, so that you can make sure you're accurately dealing with things. Okay, because somebody will tell me something like, oh, well, I have this thing about criticism, and then they'll start telling me their story, and it's like, interesting. Yeah, okay, that is criticism, but guess what else that's called? Abuse. Okay?
Yes.
Or they'll tell me this story, and I'm like kind of still waiting for like, well, what was the critical part? Because I still don't hear that, but
Right.
they hear that. So this is why it really then comes back to you, because what is that criticism? How are you identifying that? And yeah, what does that mean? And who is it by? Because then that also makes a difference. Sometimes people are like, whatever, if somebody says something to them. But if like, you know, someone you look up to or someone you're wanting to get to know better or your boss or who knows who, like it may have more impact. So you have to kind of deal with all of those pieces of it.
And that's such an important thing. I remember years ago, I must have been in my, I think, early 20s, right? And I had this situation where I was working for somebody and I looked up to them and admired them, and you know, I was having an off day, and I went and talked to one of my mentors, so to speak, or a coach that I also looked up to and admire, and I said, you know, I'm really dealing with this, and he says, well, what the hell is it you admire about this person so much, right? And I started explaining, and then you know, and then he stopped me and goes, well, you know, what does that really mean? He goes, first of all, does this person have really what you want in life? I mean, do they have the quality of life that you want? Do they have the, you know, the emotional freedoms that you want? He probably said other things that I'm trying to recollect back like 25 years ago. But does he have what you want? And he goes, if he doesn't, then who cares? Right? And I said, well, I care. He said, well, you can choose that. He said, but just as easily you can choose not to, because if he doesn't have what you want and you do what he does, you'll get what he's got. And do you want to be miserable like him?
Right.
Then stop doing what he does.
Yeah.
And stop taking it so darn personal.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so you probably see versions of this all the time, right?
Yeah, and that don't take things personal thing is one of these like life lessons, because you know over time it's like you end up covering all these life lessons with people, and that's one of the big ones is don't take things personally. Yes, I know it's easier said than done, but this is the thing behind it. It's what I actually was saying earlier, is because people are very egocentric. People are very much in their own mind, their own thoughts, what everything is to do with themselves, their perspective, what's going on with them. So how somebody acts towards you, reacts towards you, interacts with you, responds to you, whatever they're doing with you has more to do with them than it does you.
Yes.
Okay, so I always tell people, this is kind of the example I use because I try to take it to something extreme. So I'll say like, okay, so let's just take something as extreme as, you know, you got like maybe 10 people lined up in front of you, and you walk up to the first person and you punch them in the face. Okay, you did something pretty influential there. You punched them in the face. Now, maybe that first person like falls down and is like hysterical and they can't handle it. Okay, then you punch the second person in the face. Maybe they punch you right back. Okay, the third person could say, you know, oh, sorry you're having a bad day. I wish you well. Okay, so the point of the story is, you could punch somebody in the face. I'm not advocating punching people in the face, okay? But
this isn't part of your normal practice, right?
Yeah, I don't have people practice
this. This is not part of the transformational process. It's just a metaphor, by the way.
Yes, so do not do this at home, okay?
Yes.
So the thing is, but you could do something
You're
that...
so angry today, Dr. Lopez. What's up with that?
Yes, I'm really tapping into that.
Yes.
Okay, using it for motivation, for passion, okay. But you could do something that influential on your part of punching someone in the face, and you could get a different reaction because it has more to do with the other person.
So the who is as important as the what.
Yes.
And in many times it can be more important depending on how you put the weight on it.
Yes.
And if you want a simple way to, you know, break away from that control factor, in fact, is to simply let go of the attachment to it. So in other words, create some detachment to what it means, which is what you're talking about.
Well, and you can even first start off with just being aware that you are having whatever feeling you're having then. Because when you're being criticized, what is this feeling? Is it sadness? Is it hurt? Is it disappointment? Is it curiosity? Like, what is it? Because sometimes there really is like constructive criticism. So it's not like you should be trying to like forget what all that's about. So if it is constructive criticism, and you can ask yourself, it's kind of like your questions of what could this mean? What else could it mean? This is really good. What else? What else? Because you need to have a range of what it can mean, because if you just have one interpretation and you keep going down that train, and your first interpretation is a negative one, this is how you kind of get into that cascade. So going to the what else could it mean? What else could it mean? What else could it mean? That's a very good technique for trying to get out of that cascade train. So what does it mean? And maybe it actually means, oh, this is a way I can improve, my performance. So communication comes in here. Okay, communication is very important, because then you can probably have an actual little learning session with the person and come out better for it. And you don't have to beat yourself up because it happened. You actually see it as the opportunity. And this is the whole thing about adding to your peak performance or adding to your performance and continuing to grow. So having the skills to be able to do that is very valuable, but so is the knowing that, hey, no, I don't accept that because because it could actually be abuse.
Right.
So you have to be aware and accurately identify and be able to delineate what is coming in, so you then can know how to best respond.
How to best respond, right? And I remember, it's so interesting that you bring that, because I don't know that I've actually talked about that example with my mentor years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Just in this course of this conversation. And it comes down to, the what and the who that plays into it. And also, where are you at in that given moment?
Yeah.
Also you talked about being aware of your feelings, thinking of the Dabdar approach. So if you're caught up in denial on it, or anger on it, or bargaining on it, right, or the depression on it, then what happens is, or the bargaining on it, you're not going to be able to truly be in touch with those feelings in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? And that's just a sad place to be, isn't it?
Yeah, and some people, unfortunately, what happens is they get stuck there and they don't make it to the acceptance part. Now, this is when you have a greater problem, because it is natural and normal to have some of this.
Yes.
But it's not very healthy or natural or normal to be stuck there. And sometimes that is what happens.
Great place to visit, not a great place to stay.
Exactly. So if you find yourself stuck there, then it turns, and it's over time, and you're really focused, then you kind of become hyper-focused on all of this stuff, the loss and what it means, and now, these kind of negative thoughts that kind of all go with it. Then it turns into what is usually called complicated grief or complicated bereavement. So that's when okay, yeah, this is kind of beyond the kind of natural, normal human response, and it's probably best for me to go seek professional help.
Yes, yes. And here's the thing, as you're watching or listening right now, think about how this could apply. I mean, one of the best books I read, I think it was in my teens, and I've read it probably a dozen times over the years, is Think and Grow Rich. Mm-hmm. And it talks about, in one of the chapters, about that one of the things that's going to knock people off track as far as their success path and truly living a rich life, not just money, but overall wealth, like we're talking about here on growthtofreedom.com, is the idea of other people's opinions.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And most of the time that can show up at home, like who you sleep with, who you're with as a partner, the relationships, the business colleagues that you surround you become who you hang around most of the time. Mark Victor Hansen says, we're the sum average of the 5 people we spend most of our time with. So all this being said, we've covered, some of the blocks that we deal with. We talk about the process of healing. We talk about it. I mean, number one, be aware of the feeling. What is it? What could this mean? What else could it mean? What else could it mean? To transform that feeling. What other advice, in the couple minutes that we've got left, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give someone to stay in that peak state, to transform from, say, a place of feeling self-doubt, from criticism, failure, rejection, whatever it is, to be at their very best?
So that's the part of then processing and integrating it to who you are as best, so you can best move forward. Now, there could be a thing where you discover, okay, you know what? That criticism was abuse, and there actually is no part of that I'm willing to accept or that I'm going to accept. And then you can make a decision and actually choose to not accept that from coming into you. So this gets into boundaries and how you maintain boundaries, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff around that. But what do you allow to come in? What don't you allow to come in? Okay, then the other parts of it, maybe there's some constructive criticism that can actually help you and serve as a motivator, and you do want to let that in. Or even if it's a loss of somebody, that is what happened, and you do need to allow that to come in, because again, this is not something you're going to get over. So how you process this stuff, how you integrate it into who you are, so how you can best move forward with it, because you can actually learn from it and or utilize it for your future the future way that you're going to be and the future way that you're going to respond and the future way you're going to learn and everything. So it's like how you move it forward, and even like it could even serve as kind of power for you. So I always talk about how you have these reservoirs, because your experiences over time, it's like they're all getting kind of stuck into these reservoirs. And so I just kind of always imagine people with all this big reservoir behind them, but that's where the power of things come. And if you just keep piling up your negative reservoir, then that's why people are quick to anger, or seemingly something small completely derails them, because they're tapping into that big reservoir of all that negative stuff. But once you learn how to more properly and in a healthy way process these things, you're not doing that anymore. You will have a reservoir that is more properly processed, and then you can actually then work with it, use it for positive things such as motivation and passion and energy and all of this kind of thing. So it's very powerful on the not so healthy side. It could also be very powerful on the healthy side, but you have to do the work to do that.
And speaking of work, what would you recommend as action steps that someone can take right now, leaving the show, watching the show, and they can walk away with, in short order, that they can put in place starting today?
Okay. So there's a lot to do. Most of it is not very short order-ish. So I'm going to try and find you something quick. So
the next steps. Obviously, it's not all the steps, but the next steps.
Well, I can maybe give you something relatively quickly to help you to not get like stuck in something, because then that can free you up to then do the work. Okay. So when something comes in on you, something negative, you can do like a quick little visualization process with it. So let's just say it is some kind of like criticism type thing that comes in. Visualize either the word criticism, or you can make a little like, a little like monster out of it, or whatever you want it to look like. But you need to visualize it, because what you're going to do is you're going to place the visualization of that on a leaf in a stream. Okay. So like a stream let's just say it's going this way, downstream this way. You visualize your leaf, you put either the criticism word or the little thing on it, and you watch it go by. Don't comment on it. You're just saying, oh, there's that criticism, and there it goes.
And there it goes. And by the way, there it goes. Time flies when we're having fun here on growthtofreedom.com. That's going to be our show for today. I'm incredibly grateful for you being here today.
Oh, thank you. I'm always
We're
looking
going to have to
here.
do this again. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Now, I appreciate you. Now is your time. Take action with what Dr. Cristy Lopez is sharing. You can learn more about her at Cristy Lopez, PhD. If you want to get a recap of the show, you can go to growthtofreedom.com/27, growthtofreedom.com/27. If this show resonated with you in some small way, repeat after me. I'm a winner. I'm a champion. I'm the best. I deserve it. And you do. Find a collaboration group, a mastermind group, find a coach in your area. As we close the show, seize the day, make it a great week. We'll see you next time on growthtofreedom.com.